What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some games in 2024 that were better than I expected. Now, as is probably unsurprising, what goes into that is largely based upon my expectations when I started playing those games, and in more than a few cases I wasn't even sure if I was going to review them at all, but I wound up enjoying them so much that I went ahead and did so. But speaking on expectations specifically for a moment, with a list like this, it's important to mention that, again, really just how you feel about a game going into it has more to do with this than just about any other aspect of it. Because if I go into a game expecting it to be pretty good, and it is pretty good, then it's just kind of what I expected to happen. Whereas if I go into a game with, lukewarm expectations, and then some aspect of it winds up being much, much better than I anticipated, even if the overall game is just fine, that's still going to be, by definition, a bit better than I expected. Now, before we dive into this fully, just as a slight reminder, I have in fact reviewed all of these, so if you would like my more in-depth thoughts for each individual title, you can absolutely go look up those reviews. But as we're coming up on the end of the year, I've kind of been taking stock of all the games I have reviewed and the couple I still have yet to review this year, so I can sort of lay out my thoughts for people. Now, to get into this video properly, I'm going to start off with probably, I would say, the most contentious one, in the sense that I think a lot of people are going to be like, oh wow, you didn't expect that to be good or whatever. And that is actually Space Marine 2. Now, if you followed the channel a lot, I actually went into Space Marine 2 unsure if I was going to review it at all. I knew I was probably going to make some sort of video on it, but seeing as I knew right away that big parts of it weren't in my normal wheelhouse, like for instance there's a big emphasis on multiplayer and PvP aspects in addition to the solo campaign, and that kind of thing just usually isn't my cup of tea, so that's why I was unsure about it. But pretty much after playing it, I just had a blast, and my main takeaway for it was kind of just that I wish there had been more of it in terms of content. Because while PvP is fun for what it is a little light in terms of PvE content even with other players. There's only a handful of missions available. So when I did wind up reviewing it, that was probably one of the bigger things I had to say, is that I just kind of wished there was more overall. But they have been addressing that a little bit. I believe in October 31st patch actually added a new difficulty and some new content even, so even that is being addressed. But really what I enjoyed so much about it is just how good the combat felt, especially what wound up being my favorite class, with their ability to jump up and then smash into enemies brute force, into melee, on top of all the guns and things of other classes. I just had so much fun tearing things to shreds, and it was a nice palate cleanser compared to the normal RPGs I play. And while there are still certainly plenty of games I enjoyed this year more so than this one, just because they're a bit more in my wheelhouse, like RPGs for instance, nonetheless I was really surprised with just how much I enjoyed playing Space Marine 2, which is what it's doing on a list like this. Now, for our number 2 entry, we actually have Geneforge 2, which received a remaster this year. The actual original title is quite old, as you can almost certainly see from even the remastered graphics, but Geneforge 2 might puzzle people because I'm kind of known as the CRPG guy at this point, and Geneforge 2 is in fact a CRPG, so you probably expected me to have pretty high expectations for it going into it. But the part of this that really exceeded my expectations was actually the story of Geneforge 2. It is remarkably well done. So Geneforge as a series is pretty much about wizards who can just straight up create life. And that comes with all sorts of ethical ramifications, as you might imagine. And while the first game did a good job of introducing all those concepts, the second game really leans into them and takes a lot of them to their more logical outcomes in terms of, what those creations are going to do with their newfound life. And it's just a really well told and well done story. And while obviously the nature of this game is going to keep a lot of people from playing it, I believe I said in that review actually that story was officially one of my favorite across gaming in general because of how good it was, and I stand by that. Geneforge 2 has an incredible story, and it was way better than I expected. Which brings us to number 3 on the list, and this is Pacific Drive. So Pacific Drive is one of those games that is just such a unique experience. It's really hard to compare it to basically anything else, because on one hand, sure, it is absolutely a roguelike roguelike sort of survival game, but that is centered around driving a car through anomalous zones while you are trying to upgrade said car and also escape this area that is ever shifting in terms of its landscape. And while I do think this game falls off towards the end, I also think it's a lot better than it had any right to be, frankly. Because if you describe any aspect of this game individually, it sounds like something that really shouldn't work. Like, just driving a car in a sort of survival craft experience while running through anomalous zones in a roguelike manner just really doesn't sound like it would be fun. And yet they managed to make this a tremendous experience that has all sorts of atmospheric vibes as you try to outrun danger and anomalies. All makes for a really unique experience, and when you play as many games as I do, a unique experience is worth its weight in gold. So while I don't want to oversell it, because I do think this game absolutely has flaws, and like I mentioned, I think it goes on a bit too long, frankly, the fact that they took such a unique concept and made a genuinely really fun game out of it was fun to see, especially for a game I hadn't even heard about until somebody mentioned it in my comment section, so that was definitely a good time. Now, number 4 on the list, a game people are probably going to get tired of me talking about at some point, and that is Another Crab's Treasure. This game is a comedic take on the Souls-like genre, poking fun at, all of that really, while also making a bunch of appropriate underwater sea humor related to crabs, of course, but in this one you play as a hermit crab who has his shell stolen from him and must, as a result, go on a journey of, honestly, self-discovery under the sea here in order to get it back. And that leads you to a whole bunch of discoveries and a surprisingly good story. Now, to explain why this one is better than I expected, I first have to give a small confession. Sometimes I play games purely because I think they might be worth a laugh. I don't go into them expecting a masterpiece. I think they just might be a little funny, and that'll break up the monotony of the many, many games I review. Many times it is as simple as that, for sure. So with that being how I approached this game, imagine my surprise when most everything about it is really well done, including the humor. There is genuinely a great game here. But the part that was way better than I expected was actually the story. Because I think looking at and hearing about a game like this, you probably wouldn't expect the story to be that good, let alone to end in a way that genuinely moves you. And yet that is exactly what Another Crab's Treasure did for me. And while yes, it is absolutely a silly, humorous game, the ending in particular really got to me in a way that is probably a little embarrassing to admit. But the ending of this one punched me right in the feelings. So while all of it is good, that part in particular is why I consider it a game that was much better than I expected. But that does bring us to our final entry, and this is actually Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, which released all the way back in January, actually. A game I reviewed and had a pretty good time with. Now, I do think it has an unfortunate situation around its New Game Plus being locked behind a DLC, which is really dumb, but I also fully admit that I am not super into the Yakuza series, and while I am a little bit familiar with them just through the grapevine, I'm hardly an expert or anything, and Infinite Wealth is definitely the first one that I actually fully went through and played. And it's one of those games that honestly feels like a bit of a fever dream when you go fully through it, because outside of the relatively serious story, the game has all sorts of side systems, some of which are ridiculous on their face, but are then taken seriously all the way to the extreme. So things that don't even seem like they would make a lot of sense wind up then becoming this fully fleshed out side quest, and then becomes just pure nonsense and super memorable as a result. And probably the most memorable of these wound up being Sujimon, a Pokemon knockoff where you go around rounding up just normal dudes who then pretend to be more or less Pokemon, while you battle them in trainer battles across the game world, and it is as hilarious as it sounds, and it's an insanely long quest line that goes into it, and because of this, I found myself foregoing the story for a little while so I could get knee-deep into this, coming up with the best strategies and how I could win individual battles, especially against the knockoff gym leaders that you have to take down, so I could get the most out of this minigame. And then as I was playing through this, trying to explain it to anybody who asked me what I was playing at the time proved nearly impossible, which led to a bunch of hilarious real-life conversations I had to have to explain this. And the thing is, that's just one quest line. That's not even including the resort short quest line, which I got super into. So while the bulk of Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth is already a really great title, just all the normal RPG aspects of it, what really was better than expected here for me was just how much each one of these little side activities turned into like a fully fleshed out game in and of itself. That was, in totality, just a fever dream of an experience that I'm unlikely to forget anytime soon. And with that, I think that's as good a place as any to wrap up this particular video. So hopefully you enjoyed that, found it entertaining, and with any luck, maybe this video was a little better than you thought it would be when you went into it. Maybe even a little better than you expected. And if that just so happens to be the case, by all means let me know what you think about these down in the comment section below, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.